all you heroes and champions, crows, pirates, and inquisitors. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast. I'm Shelby.
And I'm Austin.
And we are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From the Maker to Lyrium to Aravels, we will cover it all. There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hey, Shelby.
Hey, Austin.
Ready to talk about some Dragon Age?
I'm always ready to talk about Dragon Age.
All right, so let's get started.
Well, do you remember our topic?
I do. Today we are talking about the Elven history.
Yes, we are. And there is a lot of Elven history. A lot of factual things that we definitely know. And thank you to Solus, a lot of things that are called into question.
You sound that's a little bitter.
I'm not bitter. He confuses me a lot. And also, I love history. I have a history background, so I want to be as sure as you possibly can. And I think that Dragon Age BioWare has very much presented, until Inquisition, presented a definitive, this is what happened. This is how it happened. And I don't necessarily think there was a lot of questioning of that history until Inquisition, until Solus came out with all of his, information about the Evenuris, about the Elven pantheon, and, were they really immortal? Or were they just really powerful mages with different magic? And all of that kind of stuff. So it's not that I'm bitter, it's just that I'm kind of confused and intrigued as to where this information will go in Dragon Age 4.
Yeah, totally. All right, so where do we even begin with Elven history?
That's a great question. I began in my research at the beginning. Well, at least as much of the beginning as I think we can get to.
It's a very good place to start.
Yeah, I figured you'd say that. So, I am going to begin in the Ancient Age, if we are going by the Chantry calendar.
So this is one thing that I realized just now in our other episodes. We've talked a lot about these ages, but never really said what age is what. Is that another podcast that we need to do, or is this something that could be done?
Yeah, we could probably do that. I mean, I can sum it up now if you want me to.
Yeah.
So, an age is essentially 100 years. So, you have the Dragon Age, you have the Blessed Age, you have the Steel Age, you have the Towers Age. These are all 100 years worth of, an age. And each age is named by the divine at that time. And usually she picks some kind of omen or symbol or whatever to name the new age. So the Dragon Age is named the Dragon Age because the divine at that time saw a dragon. Dragons came back for the first time in a long, long time. And everybody was talking about it. So that's why Dragon Age is named the Dragon Age. It was kind of seen as a bad omen too, a bad sign, which, there was another blight. A lot of crazy stuff happened. So,
Yeah. And the Ancient Age is the only one that's different, right?
Yes, thank you. The Ancient Age is different because it's kind of like all of the prehistory almost. It's kind of like the proto-history. It's all of their, what's the word I'm looking for? All of their
origins.
Their origins, their legends, their tales, their stories that shape the world. That's where all those stories happen. So the Ancient Age, I don't even know the numbers. It's a long time, thousands of years or whatever. This is when Tevinter is founded. This is when Tevinter expands. All the Elven history, not all the Elven history, but a lot of the Elven history, all this stuff happens in the Ancient Age. So, if you look up a timeline of all the things you know about Dragon Age, the elves are going to have the oldest dates because that's just what we know. We just know those dates. So Arlathan and Elvenon are like the two big things. Elvenon is kind of like the elf country, and Arlathan is like its capital. So kind of like Ferelden is a country in Thedas, and Denerim is its capital. It's kind of the same, a little bit more loose with the boundaries, I would say, than a specific country like Ferelden. But if you look at maps of Thedas, you can see like Arlathan Forest, like that's still a place. It's over by Tevinter. There are stories. I'm thinking specifically of in Tevinter Nights. I can't remember the name of the story, but there is a story about a Tevinter mage and an elf, and they get kind of captured by Kunari, and it's like on the outskirts of the Arlathan Forest. So like it's a specific place. It's not just an idea or this story that the elves tell each other because they don't really know much about it. Like, no, it's a place. We know that it's a place.
And just a little thing about Arlathan, at least what I remember from the games, albeit it's been a while since I've played the Trespasser DLC. I've only ever played through it once.
Okay.
And so I was just thinking, they tell you the crossroads when you get into the Alluvion, which are like mirrors that are kind of teleportation devices. When you go to the crossroads in Trespasser, there's a state of like, especially if you take Sarah or someone else who is more akin in Elven lore, or the things like Dorian will comment like, is this Arlathan? When you're walking through the crossroads.
Yeah, I remember him saying that. Yeah. I don't know if we know the actual answer to that. I think the way the story goes is leading us to think that it is, but I don't think we've had a confirmation on that.
Right.
So, Arlathan, actual place. We know that it is. Elvenon is like the ancient kingdom for all the Elven people. So this is like one of the big things that the Dalish still have of their Elven history. They don't have a lot, but like this is one of the big things they know. So there's some important things to know during this time, and I'm going to present some of this information not necessarily as if it is fact, but as it is presented in the game. Solus really questions a lot of this information and says, well, no, that's not exactly right. I think that Solus has a valid point, but I don't think that we can just take him at his word either, just like we can't just take the Chantry at the Chantry's word and say, okay, yeah, you've got it 100% right, because they're each coming from their own biases, their own perspectives, their own agendas. So I'm kind of like sifting through all this information and figuring out what aligns and what the other says about each other, and kind of just like figuring out that middle ground. So that's where I'm kind of bringing all this information from. So during this time in Elvenon, the elves supposedly didn't age. They weren't immortal, but pretty close to it. They like didn't suffer from deterioration of the mind or body, and magic was very, very common. It was commonplace. It wasn't something that was like looked down on, and really almost everyone had magic at that point in time. So Arlathan wasn't like the only city throughout Elvenon, but it's the one that the Dalish like have hyper focused on, probably because it was the biggest, and probably because we just know the most about it. So human scholars unfortunately believe that Arlathan is like the only city in Elvenon, which I just think is silly and unlikely, impractical, illogical. Like it just doesn't make sense. So anyway, Arlathan is founded around like minus 7600 ancient, and like I said, located in this huge forest in northern Thedas. And it was a place where ancient elves would go to trade knowledge, see old friends. They lived, they traveled there, seen as a pilgrimage, like all of these things. And I think it's important to note that the elves of Arlathan and Elvenon first made contact with dwarves about 4,600 years before the end of the Ancient Age. The Dalish have no legends about fighting dwarves. I think that's really important to note. And a lot of people think that one of the reasons that dwarves fear the sun is actually because of the ancient elves. Because Elgernon, the Allfather figure, his symbol is the sun. He is fiery. He's very angry. And so folks think that that's one of the reasons why dwarves fear the sun, because of Elgernon. And the quote from that comes from the torn notebook in the Deep Roads in Dragon Age Inquisition. I just think that's really funny. They put so many like hidden Codex entries into these DLCs, and I find that suspicious. It's a little sus. Anyway, the Dwarven Shaperate also speaks of an elven-ruled Thedas devoid of humans. So elves ruled the land, and dwarves ruled the underground, and they had no conflict until humans come in. I think that's really interesting.
Yes, and kind of undoes a little bit of what we talked about with the chantry and the chant of light, because mankind and the elves they're almost created and come into being simultaneously.
Right.
But the elven history says the otherwise.
Right. So humans arrived in Thedas about 3,100 years before the Ancient Age ends. And some have suggested actually that humans came from Parvalan, which is now the Kunari homeland, which I think is interesting. I don't know if humans and Kunari share like a common ancestor far back. I don't know. But elves named the humans Shemlin, which means quicklings. And so they did that because of the shorter lifespan. Humans were very much seen as brash and aggressive, warlike even, violent and impatient. I think that description sounds like Elgernon myself. But anyway, soon the elves that had spent time with humans found themselves aging. They were no longer immortal or close to it. So they immediately shut it down, closed the borders of Elvenon to preserve their civilization, really. But unfortunately, it was too late, because the human Tevinter Imperium was rising to power, and they moved to conquer Arlathan. And it is said that they were aided by demons and dragons. So this happens about minus 981 ancient. And so, according to the Dalish, when the city of Arlathan was breached by Tevinter, their ancestors chose to flee rather than to fight. So what happens then is that Tevinter uses blood magic to force the very ground, basically causes an earthquake to kind of just swallow up the entire city, with a bunch of the elves in it. And so the ones that didn't die were enslaved by Tevinter, and like we know of today, the elves in modern Thedas, the human contact quickened their veins until every captured elf turned mortal. So there were actually a few elves that escaped either death or enslavement, and they actually go to Kadash Tig, which Kadash Tig is the Tig that you go to in Shale's background story, and the Dwarven Inquisitor is part of the Kadash clan. So Kalsharok learns of these elves that have kind of sought a refuge in their town, right? And so instead of supporting them like you would think your allies would do, they destroy it, because they are trying to cover up any evidence that would jeopardize their alliance with Tevinter. So this is kind of the history of how Arlathan falls, right? And for me, if I was an ancient elf, I would be asking, why the heck didn't my gods protect me, right? Like these ancient gods who are immortal, super powerful, and they walked to the earth right beside me and we worship them as gods. Why didn't they do something different? Why didn't they protect me? Well, actually, the Dalish attribute this, failure of the gods to protect people. They attribute that to Fen'Harel, and say that Fen'Harel or Solus or the Dread Wolf, he'd already done his little trickaroo where he tricks them and sends them away, banishes them, essentially kills them all. That had already happened by this time, and so they were just gone, and either the people of Elvenon and Arlathan either didn't know about it or they knew about it and they didn't care. So that's kind of what the Dalish think about all of that.
It's so interesting, the parallels to, like, it's not exact, but the parallels in the Elven pantheon to Norse mythology.
Yeah.
Just even in their names, like Elgar'nan is the All-Father, and Fen'Harel is the Dread Wolf, and it's a wolf that is responsible for Ragnarok.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
Finnair is what is.
Oh man.
All right, I'm probably butchering that pronunciation.
Why do you always say pronunciation? It's pronunciation.
Pronunciation, whatever. I like to say it that way.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm from the South. I can pronounce things however I want.
Well, I'm from the South too.
Well, you can pronounce things however you want.
Okay. Anyway, we're off topic. So another thing that the ancient elves did that I find interesting is, I have a very loose definition of interesting here, but the ancient elves also waged war on the Titans, which is just like incredibly stupid to me. But again, I'm an American from the South, so I just don't really have much room to criticize them on that.
Well, I think it's interesting in the fact that they go to war with the Titans, and the Titans are viewed almost as, like, in a lot of things, they're viewed as the source of lyrium.
Well, they are the source of lyrium.
Yeah.
Like, I think they
so
are, right?
There's a sense of, like, maybe the Elven gods, or Arlathan, they go war against the Titans because they want to control magic.
Yeah.
And
if
we take Solus's word,
do we ever take Solus's word?
Yeah, but if we take Solus's word, then the Elven gods were power hungry.
Well,
they wanted to
I think
control.
That's pretty obvious. Yeah. So if they have this desire to control and consume everything, which I think they do, not only based on what Solus tells us, but based on their interactions with Mythal, then yeah, I guess it would make sense that they would want to conquer the Titans too, right. The original colonizers, if you will.
Right. So that's the ancient elves.
Yeah.
But what about, how do we get from the ancient elves to what we know is the Dalish?
Yeah, okay. So I think there's a big part of it that we just don't know about. I think that's a lot of how history goes. But so basically Elvenon, Arlathan, they fall, right, to Tevinter. Majority of the elves are enslaved by Tevinter. Well, it's not really until Shartan that we know of that a lot of elves get freed. And we talked in our last episode about Shartan, about how he led a slave rebellion to free a lot of the elves. And he does that. He succeeds. And then he meets Andraste. And they link up. Their armies link up. And that joining, I think, is the reason why, not that she's not the reason why he succeeds, but their partnership is the reason why the success was sustained and continued. I think that Shartan would have been successful and was successful without Andraste, but I'm not sure that success would have, continued on into years and years and years. I think that they maybe would have been reconquered by Tevinter. Nobody can say that for sure, but I think that would or could have been a likely scenario. But that's not what happened. He joined up with Andraste, and they conquered a lot of Tevinter, and they set a lot of elves free. So that's how a lot of elves get out of Tevinter, with Andraste and Shartan. And so basically what happens is that because of their partnership, Andraste and Mafarath, they promise Shartan and the elves that they'll give them a homeland. And when the battles are over, Andraste has died by this point, but Mafarath upholds that end of the promise, which at least he has a drop of integrity. Not that he had that for his wife, but anyway, I'm not bitter. So Mafarath gives the Dales to Shartan, and that's when they have the long march to the Dales. And actually, Shartan dies in this march. I think we talked about this a little bit in our last episode, but anyway, so it's established in minus 165 ancient. So there's a lot of time between the fall of Arlathan and when Shartan and his elves get the Dales. So that happens, and then a few centuries later, the Dales of the elves have lived in the Dales for a few centuries, several centuries. I'm not sure of the exact dates because I didn't write it down, but the elves have established the Dales as their new homeland. Halam Sharal is really like the capital, and they have some intense relations with the surrounding humans in Orlais specifically. And so that's a tense relationship, and I think there's a little bit of violence on both sides. But the elves attack the village of Red Crossing, which is a village in Orlais. And we learn about this in Dragon Age Inquisition. And so there has been violence on both sides, like I said. But the elves had also captured Montsimard, which is like a kind of a big town in Orlais. They had sacked Val Royeaux. So they were really making some real strides into Orlais. I think they have every right to. Personal opinion. But the Chantry is obviously unhappy with this. Orlais is obviously unhappy with this. And so the Chantry sources, they say, well, the elves were hostile and violent and isolationist. And then they attacked this village out of nowhere. And so then they declared the Exalted March on the Dales, which I don't think is an accurate description of it either. But then also the Dalish say, oh, well, it's just persecution. The Chantry just wanted to convert us, which is also not accurate. I'm definitely not a person who, wants to always find the middle ground, but I think that there's definitely truth on both sides, and I think there's definitely inaccuracies in both of these narratives.
So I just a little inner question just for that. Like, we hear these terms, and if we dive into Codex, we might find this, but what exactly is an Exalted March? Like, what is its decree? Like, it sounds to me like a crusade. Is that a fair comparison?
I think that's a fair comparison. I don't have like a specific definition for you, but basically they march from Val Royeaux or wherever to the Dales to destroy everything in their wake, to take the Dales back, and they do. That's what happens, and I think it's really unjust for a religious organization that is founded on the teachings of Andraste, really, to do something to a group of people that she not only partnered with, but that she made a promise to.
Right.
I think that's really unjust.
And, if you're curious about, like, you can see the aftermath, a little bit of this in Inquisition. The area, the Exalted Plains, is an area that is where, the Chantry and Orlais march through to the Dales to make this, and even Dorian or someone comments on it. It's like, it's hard to believe that this was all once forest.
Right. Yeah, exactly. like it's total destruction. And obviously, like, the Exalted March again happened several centuries before the events of Inquisition, um, because what we know is Elven culture now is, okay, elves either live in alienages like in Ferelden, or they live in and they live as servants to nobles in Orlais. That's what most Orlesian elves do. So it's, two different things, but that's not how it was when they had the Dales.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for the elves today. So let's take a break, and then we can go and we'll talk about our side character.
Yeah.
All right. See you after the break. All right. Welcome back from the break. We're here to talk about our side character, and keeping with our theme, we're going to be talking about a very important elf, especially an elf for the Inquisition, and that is Briala.
Yes.
Which is Empress Celine's Elven. I don't know what her official title is, but there's a romantic history there. She also is Elven Ambassador is her official title, I believe.
Kind of, yeah.
And so we're going to talk about her and just what she brings to the table and everything you may or may not know, because she is also in a book, right, that is called
The Masked Empire.
The Masked Empire.
That is correct.
All right. So let's get started. So just kind of like, do we know anything about Briala's, like, where she comes from?
Oh, yes. Okay. I'm going to get into that.
Mm.
So, Briala, I find her a very interesting character, and I really want her to come back in Dragon Age 4, because there's just so many implications here. So let me give you a little bit of a background just about her personal history before we get into more of what she does in the games. So, Briala is the elven handmaid, spy master, and former lover of Empress Celine Valmont I of Orlais. So, we meet her in Dragon Age Inquisition and in the Masked Empire book. She has a huge role in the novel, and I really want to get into this backstory because I think based on the novel, not based on how we meet her in the games, based on how we meet her in the novel, she could have, a much bigger arc in future games, depending on your choices, of course. But anyway, so Briala grew up as the child of elven servants to the Valmont family. Her parents proudly worked for Prince Renaud, and they worked really hard to protect their status and position in the household, as well as to ensure that Briala had a future, right? So her parents played the game. Like, they straight up played the game. Briala's father taught her to avoid eye contact so that she could watch people without being noticed. And her mom taught her all about Orlesian politics, as well as pride in who she is as a city elf. So because of her parents, she never really knew the poverty and strife of what it meant to live in an alienage. So when Briala was a kid, her mom had another elven servant accused of theft. So that Briala, instead of the other servant, would be Princess Celine's personal handmaid. So Celine was 10 at that time, and Briala's mother instructed her daughter to be careful, obey Celine in everything, and become her very best friend. So that's what she did. And the two of them, Celine and Briala, grew very close, and Briala would eventually love her and cherish her as a friend, and even see her in a more romantic light. So, as we know, Celine's parents died when she was young, like an early teenager. So Lady Mantione extended an invitation to Celine to come to her estate for a meal. And she had not done that since before Celine's parents had died. So this is like a big deal for Orlesian nobility. So Selene goes to Lady Mantion's house, and they basically plan the assassination of Emperor Florian, which is also a big deal. Like, they just talk about all these things like, oh yeah, we planned an assassination, no big deal. It was over dinner. We had some great wine. But, like, that's a big freaking deal.
That's the game.
That is absolutely the game. I would be a really bad Orlesian. I'm just going to say it. Anyway, so they're planning this assassination, this murder, and so that Selene is not implicated in the murder, Selene suggests that they send assassins to her estate to eliminate and kill all of her servants, who would be the only people who knew about this meeting. So that's what happens. Assassins arrive and they kill everyone, including Briala's parents. Briala was the only survivor. So when Selene returns from the meeting and finds her, she didn't tell Briala that she was the one that planned the murder of her parents, basically. So Briala figures it out. Like, she's not dumb. So she figures it out, but she didn't really suspect Selene. So, essentially what happens is Selene makes Briala leave so that she's not suspected for the murders. And so she sends her to the Dalish, and before Briala leaves, Selene kisses her for the first time. So Briala then leaves Val Royeaux, and she would have fallen to bandits on the road if it wasn't for the intervention of the elven mage Felisson, who killed the bandits. So Felisson's rescue is the first time that Briala sees an elf strike a human. And this kind of opens her eyes to the fact that there's a different world out there, that she doesn't always have to be the submissive, the inferior elf to the better, superior humans. And so this is a very eye-opening experience for her. And she wants to join Felisson and create a better world for elves and liberate and free them. And Felisson listens to her and basically says, if you want that to happen, you need to go back to Selene. She's the empress, or she will be the empress. She's the one that you need to work with to make this happen. So that's what she does. She spends the next years plotting to kill Lady Mantion to avenge her parents. And she does this. She kills her, and actually almost dies herself in the fight, but she avenges the death of her parents and goes back and serves Selene again. Also, I forgot to mention, spoiler alert, Felisson is also an agent of Fen Harel. This will come back in a few minutes.
So it's one thing that's really interesting about, like, because this really aids to our kind of, like, elven history, because we did talk about how the ancient elves got to the Dalish, but we didn't really speak about the city elves.
Well,
very much
right.
in our story, but, like, this talks about, like, in Ferelden and Orlais, the city elves might not be enslaved in name, but they're in such high poverty, and
they're very obviously looked down upon in society. Like, they're oppressed, they're marginalized.
And they're often servants to these humans, and so it's almost like, if I was an elf, I would look like this. We just traded one human master for another.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the argument between Orlesian elves and Ferelden elves, right? Like, Ferelden elves very much feel like, okay, well, I'm free. I don't have anything. I have to live in an alienage. I am broke, but I'm free. Whereas Orlesian elves are like, okay, well, yeah, I'm indebted and I'm in service to a noble, but, like, I eat well. I have money to provide for myself. I live in this fancy house. So I think that's very much the argument between those two groups.
So yeah, let's get back to Briala.
Yes, we got off topic. But anyway, so Briala goes back and she spends time with Selene. She's her handmaiden again, whatever. But Selene is empress by this time, and eventually word starts to spread about the empress and this elven servant girl having a romance, which is, would be very controversial. And good old Gaspard, he had to be in this story, right? Well, Gaspard learns of this rumor, and so he, because he wants to be emperor, figures out a way to use this against Selene and to benefit him. So Gaspard and his followers, they stage a play, basically, making fun of Selene and Briala. And, like, theater is a big deal in Orlais. And so, like, the Empress went to the theater, and she went to, like, the opening of this play and all this stuff, right? So it's a big deal. And so this play is making fun of the Empress having an affair with an elf. And it's true. She is having an affair with an elf. So she lets it get to her. And I'm sure everybody guessed that, okay, well, if it wasn't true, she would have just laughed it off or not made a big deal about it. But Selene kind of loses it when this happens. Her response, she, in retaliation, she goes on a march to Halam Sharal and, like, destroys the entire city. She kills a bunch of elves, which is, like, a huge overreaction to, like, an insulting play. But, you know, when you're an empress, when you have all this power, that's what you can do, right? So everybody's like, oh my God, yeah, she is sleeping with this elf then, because that's her reaction. And it's a big deal. So Selene destroys Halam Sharal, and Briala is rightfully pissed off. And this kind of, like, is their breakup, really. This is when Briala realizes that they've got different priorities, number one. And number two, like, how can she be with someone who would just murder so many of her people?
Just people in general, I
Yeah.
think would be where I was at. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. But especially, you know, her people. So, the Masked Empire continues this storyline, and there's a lot of stuff that I left out, but that's, like, kind of a basic overview of Selene and Briala's relationship, and I really recommend this book. This is probably one of my favorite novels. If you're at all interested about Briala or about Selene or about Michel de Chavannes, he's in there. I love him. Or even Gaspard. Really, you should read it. I will say, I know this is off topic a little bit, but I hated Gaspard. And then I read this book and I kind of understood where he was coming from a little bit more, which was surprising to me, that I would feel any kind of empathy or sympathy for Gaspard, because he's kind of a jerk.
Right.
But the book is really good, and I think it's written really well, so I definitely recommend it.
Just a couple of last thoughts of mine on Briala.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, do you have more?
I did, but go ahead.
Okay. No, you go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So I just wanted to bring it back into the present day where we meet her in Inquisition. So we meet Briala during Wicked Eyes and Wicked Hearts. It's basically Selene versus Briala versus Gaspard. We all know this if you played the game. But since breaking off from Selene, Briala has raised an army of underground elves during the Civil War in Orlais. And so when peace talks are called during Selene's ball, Briala, like we know, is invited as an ambassador. And Selene really hopes that she can gain this alliance with Briala and her network. And Briala attends because she hopes that she can influence one side into elevating an elf to noble status, to give her people more of a say in Orlais. But in Trespasser and in the Masked Empire, parts of this get set up in Masked Empire, but in Trespasser we learned that there's this network of Illuvions, the mirrors, right? And Briala has controlled a huge section of this network for a long time, and that's how she's really raised this underground army of elves. But she got control of it because of Felasan, her friend, her Dalish elf friend, who is the agent of Solus, of Fen'Harel. So he gives her access to this network, and when he does this, it's actually in direct rebellion to an order from Solus, from Fen'Harel. And it gets him killed. And so in Trespasser, we find out that Solus has control of the entire Illuvion network again. So we don't know what's happened to Briala. We don't know if she has become an agent of Solus or not. We don't know if she is alive or not. We don't know what has happened to Briala, but because of the tie-in to the Illuvions, I think that she might come back into DA4.
Right. I think that, like, what stands out to me about, and, like, why this is, like, a good point, like, why I love Dragon Age, is that you don't need the Masked Empire to understand what's going on or what to do in Inquisition. You cannot read it and make an informed decision or do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
But reading it enriches, which is what I feel like this extra, like, because the games are kind of our main source,
Mm-hmm.
and then the books are
additional
sources.
Yeah.
And I like that because, like, when you think about it now, I always thought, like, okay, you give Briala a necklace and she suddenly forgives Celine for everything that she does. But it makes sense now because I recently did this in my playthrough. You give it to her and she goes, I didn't even think she still kept things like this. Which with that whole story kind of reminds me of, like, I didn't know that this Celine I knew still existed.
That's fair, but I have always seen it as, like, wow, after reading Masked Empire, there's no way I want these two people to get back together. Celine has wronged Briala so much. So now every time I play through after reading it, I'm like, no, F Celine, I don't want her. Well, I don't want her and Briala to get back together. Right. But then Gaspard is worse, so what do you do?
I don't even know what happens, like what the implications of Gaspard being emperor are.
I've never done a just Gaspard rules playthrough. My most recent playthrough is I did where Briala is basically calling the shots behind Gaspard, which is really interesting. I like that outcome.
All right. Any last closing thoughts on Briala?
I love her, and I would love it if she could be a party member. I think that would be really cool. I don't think she would be an agent of Solus, an agent of Fen'Harel, because she is so focused on freedom and liberation for her people, the city elves primarily. And she always, there's a part in the book that's really powerful where she finally meets Dalish elves and they treat her just like as if she's a human. And she is righteously upset. And she's like, you could help us, but you've written us off as if we're just humans. How dare you, basically. And she's upset about it, and I think she has every right to be. So because of that interaction, I just don't think that she would join up with Solus. I think that she's much more focused on freedom and liberation and justice for all of the elves of Orlais and Thedas in general. And as we know, Solus doesn't give two craps about the elves of Orlais.
Definitely a lot of moving pieces going in to Dragon Age 4.
So many.
Because we've got, especially if we take in the DLCs, we got the whole Descent DLC, which brings in a lot of implications into Dwarven.
Yeah.
What Dwarven understanding is going to be.
Yeah.
We've got Briala and her setup of the elves along with
Solus.
Solus.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And we have this whole Qunari to Venter thing that's still going on.
Yeah, I mean, basically every race is coming to a civil war. Like, the humans have the Chantry and the Templars. Obviously, that has not really been solved. Tensions are still there. The Qunari is their 3 different governmental agencies. I guess that's the right word for it. They're military, they're spies, and they're, like, women priest leaders. They're all fighting. The elves, obviously, with Solus, that's a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. And then the dwarves with the Titan. Yeah.
Right.
So it's kind of like every race is.
Well, I wonder, like, how much our choice of who rules Orzammar is going to affect, like, this, like, if we're going to get anything on, like, the aftermaths of Volta coming back. And, like,
I don't know. We'll see.
Lots of moving pieces, lots of exciting things.
Yeah.
All right, that's all we have for this week. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. As always, you can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast. If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, email them to us at dalorecast@gmail.com. The Dragon Age Lorecast is a part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club. You can join the Robots Radio Network Discord by clicking the link in our episode description. If you enjoyed our show, we'd love it if you'd subscribe and give us a review. See you next time.
Have you ever wanted to deep dive into the lore and stories behind all your favorite Marvel movies? Then do we have the show for you? I'm Captain Shenko.
And I'm Psych88. Join us as we dissect the media megalith that is the MCU. We'll talk about the origin stories, the fights, and everything in between.
The MCU Lorecast releases on all major podcasting platforms on Mondays as part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club and can be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.